Welcome back to another edition of the Derek Evans Show, where we talk about the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life. Learning how to fit in. In this segment, I want to talk about something that really is about fitting in, but it's also about learning to be you. One of the reasons I developed the Shinsei method was really to serve as a reference, a waypoint, a compass in a sense, that provided some valuable insight for allowing you to be yourself, essentially. What I like to call the power of individuality or the power of you. And when I developed the Shinsei method, as with a goal to establish what I call the 3 pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability. Inner strength, inner balance, self-trust. Particularly self-trust, because I found self-trust is very difficult to develop, but it's very important to develop, and it's very important to guard, maintain, and value throughout your life. But to the extent that you develop a level of individuality, which means a greater sense of understanding about yourself, your views, your values, your policies, practices, your procedures, your life, essentially, your existence, your attitudes, your views, your perspective. To the extent that you strive toward developing a greater sense of individuality, the forces and the social pressure that builds against you doing that becomes very strong in your life. And so I found that one of the most important goals in your life is to understand something about yourself, and that's one of the things that I developed at the Shinsei method to do: analyze your key terms, define those terms in an individually suitable way, act on those terms, reevaluate, repeat. That becomes the process of Shinsei, but it also becomes the process of development, of self-analysis. Most importantly, it becomes the process of you. But it becomes very difficult to do that because most of the people that you experience, at least I'm speaking from experience, many of the people that you encounter in your life don't support that. You get a lot of social resistance against doing that, even if, and I want to highlight this, even if doing that doesn't affect them at all. Now, you can strive in your life to be a goal-oriented person, to be someone for whom self-development is important, and that affects no one else. I mean, if you live your life according to, let's say, the Shinsei perspective, where you will do no harm to others as well as doing no harm to yourself, there's an importance to establish that level of balance, because a lot of times what I found is that people will encourage you to be overly concerned about society and the social settings, about others, and then they give a pass to being concerned about the things that affect you, as if somehow, miraculously, you're not a part of those others. Well, I'm here to tell you that, and to remind you that you are a part of others. It's not that you are establishing yourself to the exclusion of everyone else, but you're not, I want to highlight, establishing everyone else to the exclusion of you. And that's a very important lesson that I had to learn, as they say, or as I can say, the hard way, because it's not a lesson that people tend to encourage you to pursue and to understand. But that, to me, was one of the first steps toward establishing a level of individuality. In other words, a comfort with a level of individuality. Now, a lot of times when people talk about individuality, they talk about it in very superficial terms. They will wear orange or yellow hair, for example, cut their hair in strange ways, what I would consider strange. It's, of course, up to them if they want to dress that way, if they want to dress in a gaudy way, as I would say. But let's face it, in most social settings, the louder you are in the way you dress, the less likely you are to be able to move along in your everyday life in a way that's going to be as efficient as you would like. Let's just be frank. So what I have found is that it's much more important to develop a level of individuality inside. And this is one of the things that was highlighted in a very famous work that has been around a long time, written by a former emperor, no less, of ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius. And his meditations were directed toward developing a level of essentially inner strength, inner balance, and self-trust, but really an inner understanding and an inner comfort with yourself. And that, again, is what I would characterize as being individuality, or a level of individuality. And that's important. I characterize it and call it a pillar of individuality, well-being, and profitability. I call individuality a sense of a pillar, one of the pillars anyway, or a pillar in your life. Well, one of the pillars would be self-trust, and the other two being inner strength and inner balance. Those are the pillars. But it's to establish a level of individuality in yourself. In other words, a comfort in who you are, in understanding who you are. And the first step in developing that level of comfort is to understand something about who you are. That's, again, why I developed the Shinsei method, to be a reference, just a way for you to say to yourself, I'm going to think about these terms. I'm going to analyze these key terms. What is individuality to me? What is success to me? What is mistake? These kind of terms that are often used, but very, very often very poorly understood. And if you seek toward developing an understanding of these fundamental terms, very often in many social settings, you're not going to get a lot of social support. And that really runs the gamut from friends, relatives, spouses. You can have a spouse, for example, that takes absolutely no interest in what you want to do. At the same time as saying that they are in your corner. Well, of course, that sends a very conflicting and contradictory message. If you're in someone's corner, you take an interest in what they do. You take an interest in their goals. Very often I've found particularly in many marital situations, this is what happens. People don't take a very strong interest in the people that they get married to. And for some strange reason, they think that this is perfectly acceptable. So you can be a person, and I've been in situations like this many times, unfortunately, or at least a few times, where you can be very specific about your views, your values, your policies, practices, procedures, and all of those could be very rational. In other words, you believe in self-development. You believe in inner strength. You believe in not harming others. You believe in compassion. You believe in, let's say, tenderness when you're talking about things like a personal relationship. These are all things that on the surface people talk about. You see a lot of movies about it. You read a lot of books about it. You hear a lot of people talking about it, a lot of podcasts on it, etc. But what I found is that not a lot of people follow the basic principles and the logical conclusions that would necessitate certain actions if they truly believed these things that they're espousing. And that then becomes really the dilemma in life, I have found. Because what happens is if you are pursuing a rational course of action, a lot of times in many social settings, including marital settings or close personal relationships, work situations, people will behave in a way as if those rational views are completely foreign to them. They get a lot of strange looks. You'll be called names a lot of times. People will recoil from you in many situations. And so what happens is you're in a dilemma. You're having to, or really forced to make a choice. I can pursue this rational course of action, this course of action to develop myself, to improve myself, to learn what the things that I don't like and accept the things that I can't change, and then take the action to change those things that I can. You can take that very noble path, and it's a very good path to take, while everybody else is saying, well, why are you doing that? Or they might be saying, yeah, you need to change, while they are completely oblivious to any kind of changes that need to be taking place in themselves. Now, there's a very famous quote, and I'm paraphrasing, from the Bible. There's a lot of wisdom in the Bible. Unfortunately, a lot of people throw it out because of the dogma that's associated with a lot of religions. But there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible, and particularly in the Christian teachings. And one of those famous phrases of Jesus was, clean out the log in your own eye before you seek to clean or to improve the yard of your neighbors. I'm paraphrasing, something to that effect. In other words, work on yourself before you look to criticize and critique and make someone else better. But unfortunately, a lot of situations in social settings, it's the complete opposite. People will often look to improve and criticize and change in other people rather than looking inward to change what's in themselves. Now, that's just a nature of reality. That's what a lot of people do. That's something that you have to come to, unfortunately, accept. The difficulty I have found, and this is an important difficulty, and that's one of the things I wanted to highlight in this segment of the show, in terms of individuality. The difficulty comes when you are a person that follows that teaching, that takes that teaching to heart, where you will seek to improve what you're saying, to communicate better, to be more clear in your communications, to be more consistent, to be more truthful, to be more honest, to be more reverent, to be more kind in many cases, to be more thrifty if you can. You will seek to do these kinds of Boy Scout, this Boy Scout tradition, in a very respectable Boy Scout tradition. You will seek to do that, and Girl Scout to that extent. You will seek to do that. And people will give the rewards, the attentions, the accolades, the promotions, the compensations, the attentions, etc., to the people that are doing the complete opposite. And so what you'll often find yourself in a position where I want to pursue these values. These values are important to me. These values of kindness, cleanliness, thriftiness, clarity, principle, in other words. And I want to pursue principle in my life, and I want to pursue principle in my character, and I want to live by principle. Very important to do. And people will say, yeah, do that, do that, do that. They will say that. And then they'll turn around and promote people that don't. They'll give their attention to people that don't. They will give their smiles and their support, in other words, the social support that I often talk about, and rewards and compensations and everything else that society often offers to the people that don't. And you're really left wondering, what's the value in these fundamental principles? What's the value in these principles and values and practices that Marcus Aurelius, that I talked about previously, alluded to in his meditations? What's the real practical value to that? Because if I pursue these things and someone else gets the promotion, someone else gets the accolades, someone else gets the attention, the support, the forgiveness, the forbearance, all of the things that you would think would be attributed to the person that is trying to do the best that he possibly can, do the best that she possibly can, all of the things that you would think would accrue to that person are not. So you're left wondering, then what's the practical value? And it's not very satisfying for people to say, well, pursue these values for themselves because they are the right thing to do. That's not very satisfactory. It's not very satisfactory, and I've heard this many times, to pursue the high road while other people are pursuing the low road and getting a lot of rewards for it, sometimes getting rich for it. Now, does that mean to follow along with them and get those rewards that accrue to that way of living and that way of operating and thinking? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the importance of self-trust, inner strength, and a balance then are crucial. Because when you are pursuing a course of action that doesn't gain a lot of social support, it's not going to be easy to do unless you have a level of self-trust, inner strength, and a balance. And then that self-trust, inner strength, and a balance becomes your sense of individuality, your sense of your rock of Gibraltar in a sense, your anchor, your way, your compass, your waypoint, your navigational tool. But it becomes very difficult to do that unless, number one, you establish that as a way of doing things, number one, and that is not very easy to do. To establish self-trust from the beginning is hard to get started, I've found. Number two, to continue it, particularly in the face of all of this social pressure not to do it. So the more you do it, the more you find that it's important to do, the more difficult it still becomes to do it. And again, luckily, the greater reinforcement you have for yourself usually, because you're not going to get a lot of support in many social settings. But a lot of the circularity also has to do with establishing self-trust, because the more you establish self-trust and you see the results of it, the more it reinforces that self-trust is important to establish for yourself. And that becomes one of your core pillars of individuality, as I said, and also well-being, profitability. I see individuality, well-being, and profitability as interrelated and intertwined. As you develop individuality from the perspective of the Shinsei method, you also develop a level of well-being and profitability, not just in financial terms. That also is important. I talked about money and the importance of money and value in another segment of the show, which you can find at the Shinsei Method YouTube channel or at the Shinsei, more information at the shinseimethod.com. And I talked about money because money is very important, because money is a representative, or it represents a portion of the life that you spend. But it's more than just that. It's not just profitability in terms of finances and money. Profitability is of benefit to you. And really, that is the true value of money. Money only has value insofar as it represents something that you can use it to exchange for something that you find to be of benefit. None of that becomes easy to do when you have partners, spouses, friends, everybody that really is often in your life, acting as if none of that is important at all. They don't pay any attention to it, they're not interested in it, and they're going in a completely the opposite direction. Then it becomes very difficult to establish this way of looking at things, this way of looking at money, this way of looking at value, this way of looking at life. So then again, that's where self-trust, inner strength, inner balance becomes so crucial to develop, and why I developed the Shinsei method to help in establishing those. Just as an example, if you're a parent, as an example, and you want to take a positive role, this is just a practical example, it has practical importance. You're a parent, as an example, or you're a student. But let's choose parenting because you're responsible for the lives of people who can't be responsible for themselves. So you're a parent and you want to take a concrete action in the lives, or a concrete role in the lives and educational experience of your children. And you want to inculcate into your children a certain values, these kind of values, for example, building up their insides, teaching them how to make certain choices that are relevant and helpful to them, and to be able to evaluate things objectively and looking at things objectively rather than emotionally, or following along an hysterical approach that is often very common in the culture today, particularly in America. And you want to take a concrete role in your children's educational experience, and you go to the schools, and if you don't have a school that's run by people who have this mentality, this view that's consistent with what you're trying to do, you'll get a lot of strange looks. Like, what are you doing that for? This is not your place, even though you're the parent. This is not your place. Why are you doing this sort of thing? And they look at you, and sometimes even worse than that, you may get into trouble. I've heard of many stories where parents do actually get into trouble, not because they've done anything, but because they're taking an active role in their children, and they're wanting to protect their children, and wanting to protect their children from harm. And you're doing that, and just about everyone in your life, including perhaps your spouse, very often this is the case, looks at you like, why are you making waves? Why don't you just go along to get along? Why don't you just let them stay, your children I mean, stay in this experience and stay experiencing these things that you know from life experience is going to cause them significant harm, unless you get it, they make it straight in their own minds, and you get that message inculcated early so that they can start to make the proper choices as they go along in life, because it makes it much easier to do when you're young versus when you get older. And again, I can speak from experience on both counts. Because if you haven't been able to tell, in this particular example, I'm speaking from direct experience. I have been through this. I have seen this with my own eyes in going to schools, trying to do that, trying to do what was right, and being looked at as if I was some kind of pariah. And it made me start to wonder, well, if no one else is doing this, is there any value to do this? And I spent many years wondering if there was really any value to this, let's say, taking this pattern and this philosophy of taking corrective action, dealing with a problem in its infancy so that it doesn't get worse, if there was any value to that value of living. Because many people really didn't do it. And other people, other parents, they were getting along. They seemed to be happy. No one seemed to be bothered by it. And thinking to myself and following along with what other people would say in terms of rising to the occasion and going up the hill and taking one for the team and setting by example, leading by example, all of these platitudes that have, on the one hand, a lot of wisdom, but on the other hand, have very little practical value in terms of what people actually do, didn't help. Didn't help at all. What I have found is that it's important not to throw the value away just because the value doesn't seem to have practicality. What I have found is it's much more important to make the value have practicality for you. And that's one of the reasons I developed the Shinsei method. One of the steps of the Shinsei method is to define those terms, the terms that you have, like corrective action. What does this mean? What does success mean in an educational experience? What does success mean if you're talking about the lives of your children, for them, for their educational experience, for their later life? What is success to them? Because it's based upon your experience. You're older, you see what works, what doesn't. So you have the benefit of hindsight in that case that you can extend to them. And that's a very important value. That's called what I like to call product value or knowledge value. And I've talked about that in other segments of the show. Product value, company value, customer value, as well as product knowledge, coming back to knowledge, customer knowledge, company knowledge. All of those are important value on the business side, but they're also very important on the personal side. Knowledge is a very, very important value. And unfortunately, when you're talking about knowledge, people don't have a very, very clear idea of what it means. When you're talking about knowledge, it means understanding and enlightenment. It's not just having a lot of data, having a lot of numbers, having a lot of techniques to solve mathematical problems. It's understanding when to use those techniques and what those techniques actually mean when you get an answer. What does the answer actually mean in practical terms? That is how I understand knowledge. And if you understand knowledge in that sense, you will have gone through that process of asking yourself what it means. That's that first step of the Shinsei method, to define a term for yourself in an individually suitable way. That's why I had to define the Shinsei method to mean that. It's not just defining a term. It's defining a term in a way that matters to you. So when you're talking about making a value, instead of throwing a value away, making it practical for you in your everyday life is part of that process of defining your terms in an individually suitable way. And I found that to be so crucial, because very often what happens is you have these important values, and many people don't give you a lot of insight into how to apply those values. And when they do, or if you are able to gain some insight into that, a lot of times in many social settings you get a lot of discouragement and demoralization or demoralizing activities for doing that. Maybe noises when you're trying to concentrate and focus. Maybe distractions when you're trying to do a task and develop a level of competence at something, because that's very common. Or you're trying to do something and someone is impeding it in some way. Or you're practicing a certain level of politeness or courteousness, and people are being rude in response. And at the same time, those rude people are getting promoted, they're getting the accolades, they're getting the social attention in many cases, which is another form of reward. So you're getting a lot of these kind of messages in life that are important to decipher for yourself. And again, that's why clarity is so important as a principle. But you're not going to practice these principles unless you realize these principles are valid and valuable. And that's part of that process of Shinsei. That's part of that process of self-analysis. That's part of that process of coming to terms with what these terms actually mean and defining them for yourself in an individually suitable way, and then acting on them to see if that's appropriate for you, and then reevaluating, and then repeating. That becomes a process of Shinsei, but it becomes a process of you through that process of self-training. And then it also becomes, by consequence, a process of self-development. Until the next time on the Derek Evans Show, where we talk about the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life.